I sat down earlier today with the intention of just making music. I had no artist in mind, no sound I was aiming for, no direction at all. I opened up a few sounds, messed around for a while, and I ended up with this crazy dark textured sample. Without wasting any more of your time, let's get right into how I ended up making this sample. Since I really had no direction for where I was going with this, I wanted to start with a bass because I figured that was the safest place to start. So I opened up Serum, I grabbed this regular bass, I think it comes with Serum, it's the fuzz bass, and I came up with this simple progression in the key of A minor. For my next sound, I went into Echo Soundworks Vinyl Guitar 2. I used this in a previous video. I said a lot of good things about it, so I just opened it back up and I created some simple chords, and this is what it sounds like dry. So yeah, nothing crazy going on here. I just followed the bass line that I already came up with, made them into triads. The only thing that I did differently in the second half was I took the fifth of the second chord and I raised it up a whole step. This is an 8-bar chord progression, but I duplicated it to make it 16 bars long. When we talk about the lead, you'll understand why. But getting into the effects that I have on this guitar, it's pretty heavily processed. I started in Effect Rack with this radiator amp. I wanted the bass cut like crazy because it was just too much. With the super heavy bass that we already had, I just didn't need any more bass from the guitar, so I cut all of that out. I wanted a little bit of distortion, and this Devil Lock plugin does that perfectly. I just raised the crush and the crunch to like 2.5, 2.25, and then I dialed the mix back a little bit. An EQ tapering off some of the highs and then adding some of like the attack because I wanted some of the strums back in. Again, lowering some of like the low mids and then also just cutting out all the unwanted bass frequencies. Lastly, reverb with just a very short decay. I wanted to put it in its own little space, so that's what this is doing. And now the guitar sounds like this. So as you can hear, all of those effects made a huge difference from what I started with before, and now I kind of had a direction of where I was headed. I went into my Soulsonics multi-kit and grabbed this lead sound, and I came up with this 16 bar phrase, which is why everything else is 16 bars. I just felt like this first 8 bars was going to get super repetitive, and I had a different idea for this right here. Nothing too different, but it makes a difference. With those 3 sounds together, this is where I was at with the sample. That's a pretty good foundation for a dark textured sample like that, but I sat down with the intention of just making something completely different and just pushing my limits a little bit. So I knew I wanted to go in and add some ear candy and just get creative with it. So what I did was I got this string again from my Soulsonics multi-kit, and I just came up with this pattern right here that repeats every 4 bars. For the processing on that, I added a compressor just to give it all one volume. Then I went into Effect Rack, grabbed Echo Boy Jr., put it on an 8th delay with a lot of feedback, but I turned the mix down a little bit on the ambient preset, filtering it out just a little bit and adding saturation. This next sound is where I start getting outside of the box a little bit. I went into Splice and I found this drone sound. It was in the key of B minor and I was working in the key of A minor, so I just pitched it down to key and it sounds like this without any processing on it. What I did next was I found a chop that had a consistent volume the whole way through, and then I used the first 2 bars of it, and then I left 2 bars of silence, and then 2 bars of it, 2 bars of silence. For the processing, I used an EQ to cut out lows and highs, but giving it a boost in like the 1500 range just to give it some presence again. Squash the hell out of it again just to keep that consistent volume. I used 2 different instances of Effect Rack, and the reasoning behind that is because in FL Studio, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong please, I don't think you can automate a parameter knob in like a third-party plugin. So I wanted to automate the depth knob with the tremolator, which gives it the wobble effect, but I couldn't do that without affecting the pan man and the radiator amp. So I put the tremolo effect on its own separate thing, and I just automated the Effect Rack plugin, if that makes sense. But the tremolo is just giving it that bounce effect at a 16th note rate, depth all the way up, but we automate the plugin later to, I'll show you. This right here is the automation for the strength of the tremolo. It just builds and it gives it that rise effect. And then for this second Effect Rack, like I said, I have pan man. Every 2 bars it's going left to right, just gives it a cool vibe. And then this radiator amp chopping out a little bit of the lows and boosting some more presence. Now that one solid drone note sounds like this. So you can tell how different that is and how that would just build suspense, especially for it only being for the first 2 bars and then dropping out to silence for the next 2 bars. Now that I had created this theme of suspense and dropping everything out in the last 2 bars, I also went into the bass and I just removed these notes right here just because it added the same vibe as this drone effect, and I wanted everything to kind of just mellow out to just the guitar. Doing that now puts me with the sample sounding like this. At this point, the sample was sounding really good, but again, I still wanted to go back in and add some more ear candy and just make things exciting because I was just having fun. Since I had taken out the bass notes right here, this was leaving the sound pretty empty. The only thing playing at the time was going to be the guitar and the lead, but the lead wasn't enough for me to build back up into this section again of just like the drone and the bass back in. So I wanted something that was going to kind of build back into it without using like a swoosh or a cymbal. What I ended up doing was I grabbed this hard bass from Analog Labs and I put it in MIDI, the E note that we had took out from here, rendered it to audio, shortened it down to like the last 2 beats of this last bar, and then I gave it this volume fade automation to do the swoosh effect that I was looking for, again without using any sort of like cymbal or actual swoosh effect. I think it does a great job of taking the silence and building it all back up to when all the instruments come back in again. Since this is a longer sample, in order to avoid the repetitiveness, I didn't want to just copy it over and have it swoosh back every 4 bars. So what I did was I found this phrase from a kit that I have, I pitched it up an octave, put it in the key, and it sounds like this by itself. For the processing on that, I have an EQ boosting some highs, giving it more presence, cutting out a lot of lows, fresh air boosting up a lot of the high end. I was having a hard time getting it to stick out in the mix, so doing this added a lot of presence to the sound. An Effect Rack using Primal Tap. I don't use Primal Tap too often. Honestly, I'm not even sure exactly what it does. I think it's like a delay, but it's like a fancy delay. I literally just came into the first basic simple short delay preset and it gave it like a cool wide delayed effect. And then Radiator Amp. I really love this Radiator Amp. For some reason, in my opinion, it's just like a really good EQ. This knob will remove all bass frequencies if you want it to, and this will add so much presence to the treble. It's just really good in my opinion. That processing really helped it stand out more in the mix, and again, it just kept things from getting repetitive. Like I said, this is a new phrase that's introduced in the last 2 bars of this 8 phrase, so keeping things exciting, keeping things fresh. Sort of doing the opposite for what the drone is doing. In the second 2 bars of each 4-bar phrase, I have these vinyl crackles that I automated to fade up to get louder when the drone drops out. It just creates a vibe and it helps add more texture to the sample, especially when all the other instruments dropped out. Finally, for the last sound I added, it was just this drum loop right here. I honestly wasn't even planning on using a perk loop in this sample. I was doing the drum test to see if the sample was good enough to like make a beat out of, but the way I processed these sounded too good to not just tuck in the back and have it be a part of the sample. This is what they sound like before I added any effects. First thing I did to it was EQ'd out lows and EQ'd out highs. Opened up Effect Rack, put it on the Perk Punch preset that I created, which has some decapitator, just giving it some crunch. The radiator amp adding some high end and presence, taking out a lot of the bass because the kick was too much. Echo Boy creating a little space for it, and then Micro Shift, of course, giving it that width that I love putting on my drums. Now the drum loop sounds like this. That right there is how I created this dark textured sample while just having no direction or plans for what I was about to make. If you learned something from this video, please let me know down in the comments, drop a like on this video, and subscribe for more. I appreciate y'all for watching.